The Nintendo Switch has games. But what of its successor, the Nintendo Switch 2? Will it too have games? Well, of course, but we don't know exactly what games will be there. Whether they come at launch or later in its life cycle, here are my top 5 Nintendo Switch 2 games and release date predictions. Some of them will be pretty straightforward, but not all of them. Let's get into it. Genshin Impact. So as of recording this video, it has been 4 years since Genshin Impact was announced for the Nintendo Switch. More importantly, it was announced to be coming soon, so why hasn't it shown up on the Switch yet? Also, why could it potentially be coming to the Nintendo Switch 2? Let's get into that. First, the developers probably feel the current Switch isn't powerful enough to run the game the way they want. With the other versions of the game, it runs smoothly on each platform for the most part. With the power of the Switch, which only has 3 of its 4 gigs of RAM dedicated to gaming, it most likely isn't able to run the game at the same level as the other versions. As for it coming to the Switch 2, I feel like Nintendo has most likely talked to the developers, MiHoYo, about the Switch's successor and told them, without specifics of course, it would be powerful enough to run their game. And I feel they told them this after a few attempts of trying to make it run on the Switch. If the reports and rumors about the Switch 2 having 12 gigs of RAM are true, then that would make it more than powerful enough to run the game compared to the current Switch, which I'm sure MiHoYo wants, which means there wouldn't be a reason to bring it to the current Nintendo Switch. So when could we see Genshin Impact if it comes to the Nintendo Switch 2? Personally, I think it'll be there at the launch of the console. It's a free-to-play ARPG with hours of content to dive into and would be a fantastic game for anyone who isn't able to buy games at launch or just doesn't want to. Also, I think MiHoYo want to capitalize on the hype of a recently released console so they can drive sales for their in-game content as much as possible. Monster Hunter Wilds. So I think this one's pretty likely because of Capcom and Nintendo's relationship. Since the Switch's launch, Capcom has been a big supporter of the console with games like Resident Evil, Mega Man, and Street Fighter. And of course, they put Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate and Monster Hunter Rise on the system as well. And on top of that, Capcom and Nintendo's relationship goes a little bit deeper. As I mentioned before, the current Nintendo Switch has 4 gigs of RAM in it, 3 for gaming and 1 for the operating system. But that's not how it was always intended to be. Initially, Nintendo was going to put less RAM in the Nintendo Switch, but Capcom reached out to them and wanted them to put more in the system so they could have their games run better on the console. So instead of the initial idea that Nintendo had, they went with what Capcom requested of them and gave the Nintendo Switch 4 gigs of RAM. That being said, if Capcom was able to influence a big decision like how much processing power Nintendo's next console was going to have, obviously the relationship is pretty solid. And furthermore, they have a vested interest in supporting Nintendo and making sure they can put their games on Nintendo's consoles. I feel like they'll put Monster Hunter Wilds on the console early after it launches, specifically because they most likely don't want to miss out on the potential sales they could get from having the game on Nintendo's next console. Also, and now this is just me speculating here, I feel like Capcom made the release window for Monster Hunter Wilds 2025 specifically so they can launch it when the Nintendo Switch 2 is out. As for why I think that, I feel there's a pretty good chance the folks at Capcom and Nintendo have been communicating about potential release windows for the console. Like I said before, the relationship is pretty good. Metroid Prime 4. Alright, so this one is low-hanging fruit. I get it. It seems pretty obvious that Metroid Prime 4 is going to be on the Switch 2. I also feel it's going to be on the current Switch as well, making it a cross-gen title. So it'll be similar to what Breath of the Wild was for the Nintendo Switch and the Wii U. Of course, it's going to run a lot better on the Switch 2 compared to the base version of it. And I'm pretty sure Nintendo understands that as well. Also, having it as a cross-gen title is going to help Nintendo showcase the power difference between the current Nintendo Switch and the Switch 2 to the consumers. Originally, I was going to say that Nintendo would bring Metroid Prime 4 to the Switch 2 early after launch, mostly because I felt Nintendo would probably have a 3D Mario game as the frontrunner at launch. Instead, I think it'll be there at launch. This is just me speculating, of course, but I feel that Nintendo sees Metroid as a series that can go toe-to-toe with their other flagship IP, like the Mario series and The Legend of Zelda. Usually, when people talk about Nintendo games, they usually mention Mario or Legend of Zelda, while Metroid often takes a back seat. I feel Nintendo has taken note of this and wants people to see Metroid as another flagship series that can sell consoles and also sell a lot of software units. And the best way to do that is to make Metroid Prime 4 a launch title for the Nintendo Switch 2 and let its success do the talking. Paladins. Yeah, I know this one is kinda random, but hear me out. First off, if you don't know what Paladins is, it's a free-to-play hero shooter that came to the Switch in June 2018, and it was supported up until June of 2023. I'm sure there are a number of different reasons why Hi-Rez, the developers of the game, stopped supporting the Nintendo Switch version, but what I think is the biggest reason is the system not being able to run the game as well as the other versions. So similarly to what I said about Genshin Impact, the devs probably want their game to run incredibly well. From my own personal experience of playing the game, there have been quite a few issues. Lots of crashing, certain textures not loading in quickly enough, and incredibly long load times. If the Nintendo Switch 2 is a lot more powerful than the current Nintendo Switch, then that would mean it could reduce or eliminate the issues that popped up with the Switch version of Paladins. Aside from just having a fully functioning version of the game on a Nintendo console, I also think the developers want to support the Nintendo Switch. Like I said before, Paladins came to the Nintendo Switch in June of 2018, which was only 1 month after its release on the other major gaming platforms, meaning that Hi-Rez Studios wanted to have the Nintendo Switch version of the game out as soon as possible. Something else that I feel adds to them wanting to support the Nintendo Switch is the fact that they also had Nintendo exclusive skins in the game. A developer is not going out of their way to make a console-specific skin unless they actually care about supporting that console. But with all of that said, when could we see Paladins pop up for the Nintendo Switch 2? Nailing down an exact time frame for this one is kind of hard, so I'm just gonna narrow it down to either at launch or early after launch. My reasoning is they're probably already prepped for the Switch 2 to come out. Development kits for the Switch 2 were sent out quite some time ago, and I feel like Hi-Rez was one of those companies that reached out to Nintendo early to make sure they had one. And the reason I say that is because of how they supported the Switch early in its life cycle back in 2018. They definitely understand the importance of supporting a console early on so they can gain a significant user base on the console. For the Nintendo Switch 2, I feel like they're gonna try and be there as early as possible because they know how well the Switch sold and understand the potential for the new console. Kingdom Hearts HD 1.5 plus 2.5 Remix. In May of 2024, Square Enix stated that they want to bring a large amount of their games to different platforms. And they've definitely kept up with that promise by releasing Kingdom Hearts HD 1.5 plus 2.5 Remix on Steam. As for the next Nintendo console, there's a very good chance we'll see 1.5 plus 2.5 Remix there as well. Also, we already have it on the current Switch, but only the cloud version. And I feel like Square might want to reconcile that. Now, why exactly would they want to make their games multi-platform? Well, the one obvious reason is they want to make more profit. Being able to sell your games on multiple systems allows for a higher revenue potential. It's also a really great way to get games that have already reached their sales potential on their current platform or platforms to have another chance at life with a different console demographic. In other words, you get to sell the same game to more people. The next reason is based on the assumption that Square Enix wants to continue having a good relationship with Nintendo. Since release day of the original Switch, Square Enix has been there with games like I Am Setsuna and Dragon Quest 1 and 2. And of course, that support has continued throughout the lifespan of the Nintendo Switch. With that being said, I feel Square Enix really wants to keep that relationship and support going for years to come. While the cloud version of Kingdom Hearts HD 1.5 plus 2.5 Remix is on the Switch, I feel that Square Enix wanted to make a console-native version instead. And the reason I feel this way is because of how they handled Final Fantasy 15 and their attempt to bring it to the Switch. So if you didn't know, the Nintendo Switch does have Final Fantasy 15 on it, but it's the pocket version of the game. The original intent was to have the full version of Final Fantasy 15 on the Nintendo Switch, but during the testing phase, they weren't able to get it to run the way they wanted it to, so they had to scrap it and give the Switch the Pocket version instead. As for the Nintendo Switch 2, I feel this would be the perfect time for Square Enix to get another chance to bring these games to a Nintendo console, but a much more powerful one that could run the games as they were intended. And I think Square Enix sees this new console as a great opportunity as well. When could we see 1.5 plus 2.5 Remix on the Nintendo Switch 2? Since Square Enix already understands the importance of having support for a console early on in its life cycle, they'll most likely release this game early after launch. Reason being, they probably have something else in store for the launch of the Nintendo Switch 2. What that something is? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine, but I do feel they'll have something there at the launch of the Switch 2. Having great games is, of course, one major way the Switch 2 could shine, but what about its other features? Check out the video on screen right now to hear my top 5 must-have upgrades for the Nintendo Switch 2. And don't forget to let me know what games you think will show up on the Switch 2 in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video and want to see more videos like it, subscribe to the channel. I'm DJ Raviesta. That's gonna be it for me. The Rhinos are watching. Good night.